You know there's nothing I would not do. Good afternoon, folks. Wanda, would you like to get started? Would you like us to get started this time?
I think we can. I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone in their interest in joining us today for this discussion. I am Wanda Swan, pronoun she, her, and hers. I serve as the chair of the Sexual Relationship Violence Prevention, Education, and Response, Casey. Say that 3 times fast. And I also serve as executive director of the Swan Center for Advocacy and Research, which is a 501c3 dedicated to supporting Black survivors of violence. And so I also am joined today with the wonderful, the incomparable Brian Medina.
Thank you, folks. It's wonderful. I would come with mixed emotions, as I'm sure many of you, but I'm very excited for us in this space together. And we have an amazing panel to then introduce themselves momentarily. Before we do, again, Brian Medina, my pronouns are Z, here, and here's. We'll do some more formal introductions momentarily, but I want to make sure that we start off with the land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and strength to the generations before them around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy into making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to migrate from their homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived in relation with the land for more generations that can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical in unmuting history, building mutual respect, and tending connections across all barriers of personhood, heritage, and difference. We believe it is important to create dialogue to honor those that have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. So we acknowledge the truth that is often buried. We are on ancestral lands, unceded to European colonists. We pay respect to the Indigenous elders and ancestors, as well as to the current tribal nations who rightfully steward these lands. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us here together today. Thank you, Chelsea, specifically. Thank you for honoring us with helping with this land acknowledgement. I'm currently on the lands of the Piscataway Conoy people near College Park, Maryland. My role within the university is the program manager for bias incident support services, but I also serve for our sexual and relationship violence prevention education response as the masculinities chair, as well as the gender and sexuality knowledge community, the men and masculinities knowledge community, and many others in service and support. Thank you for being here in this space. Wanda, would you like to give us some context as we start off today?
Absolutely, thank you. And thank you for that land acknowledgement. I also want to acknowledge that I am currently right now in the Atlanta, Georgia area, Stockbridge, Georgia to be exact, and I am on the ancestral lands of the Muskogee tribe. As a knowledge community that's dedicated to education on sexual and relationship violence prevention, education, and response, we've been working to be intentional with our time and the ways in which we contribute content across NASPA spaces. Our advocate track at this year's Strategies Conference served as one of the first outward-facing spaces where we intentionally worked to create a track that supported professionals and their supportive students, but we also complicated, nuanced, and questioned the origin of the anti-violence system that at times, even despite our best intentions, seems to sit a little too flush within higher education systems to prevent the change that our students really need. So we took that track as an opportunity to interrogate how our own house um, needed some work, and we also included research that led to an origin story of the anti-violence movement that centered Black feminist abolitionism, an origin story that was whitewashed by the field itself. That opportunity and the feedback we received from many of you who registered today was the spark that led to us seeking out more spaces for innovation. This webinar, consisting of a host of other NASPA KC representatives to continue this conversation from behind a paywall, is another opportunity for us to do that. We expected 50 people and we hoped for 100, but the outstanding registration number of nearly 300 proves that these conversations are necessary. Many of you are preparing to return to your campuses in the fall. While we're still very much in a pandemic, or as I like to say, a whole panorama, after so many school shootings, after Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all charges in the murder of George Floyd, and after so many other acts of police brutality, and so many other BIPOC unrest and discrimination instances, this won't be easy. Our expectation today is to provide you with an opportunity to think critically about the ways you can start or continue to transform your respective spaces, to provide education, support, and anti-oppressive strategies for the betterment of our most vulnerable students. We cannot thank you enough for your interest. We can't thank you enough for your time. There are some housekeeping rules that I want to also contribute to the space today. Please note, as I said before, that this webinar consciously exists outside of a paywall. This webinar will be recorded for the purposes of making this available to all. And many may not be comfortable with submitting questions and or participating while there is a possibility of visibility. And we understand that and we respect that. In previous advertisements and promotions for this, we've encouraged folks to rename themselves, to join by phone, to utilize the option of keeping your video off, etc. If you do not wish to be seen in a space. Additionally, we've also asked folks to update the most recent version of Zoom to allow for closed captioning, and there's also opportunities for transcription. Brian.
I also wanted to note and welcome 3 of our co-facilitators, Jeff Epley, Sarah Cleme, and Serene Dale. They are going to be monitoring the chat as well as the Q&A. And so we welcome your questions. We hope for this to be an engagement. We certainly have many questions for our panelists that we have already pre-planned, but we'd love to have the engagement within the chat amongst one another, affirmations, quotes, what have you, but also being loving and compassionate as we are engaging in this very deep and heavy work together with one another.
And at this time, we're going to ask that the panelists come through and introduce yourselves by giving your pronouns, your Indigenous population, the KC that you're representing today as well. And I'll ask if it's okay that I can just start by asking the folks as they appear in order on my screen. Winnie, would you feel free to go first?
Sure, not a problem. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Winnie Paul, she, her, hers. I currently sit on the ancestral lands of the Wappinger and the Munsee Lenape peoples in Norwalk, Connecticut. So that is southern Fairfield County. I serve as the NASPA Gender and Sexuality Knowledge Committee's co-chair. And for some of my day-to-day work, I am the Title V clerk / SOAR project assistant at Norwalk Community College. I'm also CEO of Winnie Paul Consulting, LLC. I'm very grateful to be in this space with you all today.
Thank you, Winnie, thank you. Chelsea, would you care to go next, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Reid. I use the she, they pronouns interchangeably. My feet are currently planted on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts people and the transitional lands of the Mashpee, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc people. I am the Indigenous Peoples Knowledge Community Region 1 representative. And I also bring with me my positionality as a member of the Gullah Geechee descendants and the West Indies that are scattered throughout. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Dr. Aaron Jones, would you care to go next, please?
Sure. As I said, my name is Aaron Jones. I use the pronouns he, him, and his, and I currently serve as the Interim Director of Educational Opportunity Programs, EOP, at UC Santa Cruz, the University of California, Santa Cruz, and that's where these forced lands are. On Santa Cruz's campus, they are the campus is on the unceded territory of the Owasso-speaking Yupi tribe, and is currently stewarded by the Womxn tribal band. And I live in San Jose, that is on the land of the Womxn and Ohlone tribe. And I'm representing the African American knowledge community. And I think that is all I'm supposed to say.
Thank you. Erica, could you care to go next, please?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Erica Zamora, she, her, hers pronouns. I am coming to you all from the land of the Coal-Wheatecan people as well as the Tonkawa. I am the Director for Student Diversity and Inclusion at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas, and I am representing the Transracial, Adoptee, and Multiracial Knowledge Community, formerly known as the Multiracial Knowledge Community. More to come on that later. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen, would you care to go next, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Chaney, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am currently on the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts and Mashpee Wampanoag community, and out of also known as Boston, Mass. And I serve in my role at a university as an area director for residence life, and I am also one of the social justice and inclusion co-chairs for the Women and Student Affairs Knowledge Community, and also as the rep for NASPA's Equity, Justice and Inclusion Division. And I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. Aaron, would you care to go next, please?
Sure. Hi, folks. My name is Aaron Parayno. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am coming to you from the lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people, just north of Boston and Malden, Massachusetts. I serve as the director of the Asian American Center at Tufts University, and I am representing the Asian Pacific Islander Knowledge community today. Thank you all.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Cece Suarez, could you please care to tell us a little bit more about you?
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Cecilia Suarez. I also go by Cece. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. And I come to you from Gainesville, Florida, which is the beautiful, wonderful, vibrant lands of the Timucua tribe, as well as a mixture of the Muskogee peoples. So I'm really excited to be here. I am here proudly representing the Latina, Latinx, Latino knowledge communities. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we can go ahead and start and jump into our first question. How y'all feel about that? All right. So our first question is, in your everyday work, how have you observed oppression and anti-oppression, and how has that impacted you?
All right, so I will start us off, I think, with this question. I really appreciated this, and when I was thinking about it, for me, it's not even so much of an observation, but something that is continuously felt and embodied, specifically within this body as a queer BIPOC person. There is really, so I also work in residence life, so I literally live where I work, and there is really something to be said as a constant mind's eye that I am making and unmaking the space that I live and work in. Institutions that the majority of us work in, right? And I can say the majority because even historically Black, tribal serving, minority serving institutions were built by enslaved people, were built on stolen and unceded land. And there's something to be said that history does not occur in abstract timelines. They occur in places and very real, tangible things. And just existing is me constantly being aware of oppression. When it comes to the anti-oppression, I mean, it's the students, right? It is my relatives in our spaces. And in supporting them and shouldering both their triumphs and their griefs, those are acts of anti-oppression. You know, hope is the thing with feathers. We are constantly seeing these new waves of bright ideas of people who refuse to be limited and constructed within these very real and living oppressive systems. And so they choose to keep coming back, right? They choose to still live within these spaces that hold on to all of the traumas and the grief that they were built in and upon. And so getting to meet them every day where they are, I find that in and of itself is anti-oppressive.
So I'll jump in next. I'll say in terms of what I observe, I 100% agree that it is also deeply felt. And it's sort of, even to sort of explain what I see, it is, it's of course exclusion, it's of course invalidation, I would even go so far as to say that carelessness is a big part of it. That it's sort of this this blanket sort of, I don't have to worry about anything else but what is in front of me, and the identities and the history that is intertwined with higher education and in society in general. It doesn't matter. This is work, and everybody should be able to interact and be in the same way. And that's not reality for many of us who are here panelists, that our identities are a part of our work, whether our work is in DEI work or not, that we bring our whole selves, and that's how we are able to do the excellent work that we do, is because we understand that wholeness is necessary, and it is it's necessary for ourselves, of course, but of course the folks that we work with, our colleagues, the students that we serve, that it's essential that we bring our whole selves, because if they can see themselves in the work, then it sort of makes all this thing in higher education, colleges, universities, whatever, it makes it all worth it. And so I will say that observed and also, dealt the way that I work in anti-oppression work, it's definitely rewarding for me, and it's affirming and liberating. And I think that if I sort of just kind of had a job where I didn't sort of have the ability to make spaces for folks and co-create spaces with folks, that I would have sort of a boring existence. That like I need that to enliven me and to really support others, whether I identify similarly to them or not. And I think that that's critical to the work as well, that the fight is not just for me and mine, that everybody is me and mine. And that's when I know that things are really working and things are really moving, is when we're able to sort of support each other, even if and advocate on behalf of each other, even if we're not just talking about ourselves. So it's tiring, but it's also at the same time really really enlivening.
I really appreciate Dr. Jones's point about like the me and mine piece. In my day-to-day work, Title V is the Developing Hispanic Servant Institution grant from the Department of Education. And working at a community college, I think sometimes other folks forget the most important part of that name, a community college. So we're there to serve the community. And in the midst of multiple pandemics, health, political, financial, et cetera, how we can really try to keep our students at the forefront and give as much equity and access, and really advocating for those students and those members of our community who may not have all the things that they need just to survive. And so I think in my work, I look at that as what I'm doing in my community, but also my work with NASPA and my other involvement. I'm also involved with the Urban League of Southern Connecticut. So in looking at not just where I live immediately, but the greater Fairfield County, and there's a huge disparity of the have and the have-nots. And how do those different things of oppression and anti-oppression look differently in various communities? And so those are the things that I bring when I bring my work. And I try to really share and really bring the student voice as much as possible. Because I think in the day-to-day, especially upper administration, they just want to get things done or move things forward. But sometimes we need to pause and sit and think and really allow our students a space to be their full authentic selves to achieve what they need to achieve.
Thank you all to all of my wonderful community panel members who have already shared really powerful words. I just want to uplift that. Thank you so much. I'll start with anti-oppression. I feel like that is, I want to end on, right, or I want to start with how I have been seeing people moving in spaces that have never been created for them, right, and are still not for us. In particular, right, I want to uplift my students. I want to uplift students that I don't even know, that I know are doing wonderful things on campus, not just my own. In particular, those who have been, who have received harm and hate for other people. In particular mentees of theirs or younger students on campus. So I want to uplift that. I also want to uplift the wonderful colleagues that I work with across the country, who we do everything from just talk trash with each other via text or write bomb book chapters, right, about squad goals and how women of color mentorship circles are the actual living proof of intersectionality. So that is how I've seen anti-oppression on a day-to-day basis, and I'm very thankful for that. And I just want to uplift all of the women of color, in particular my Black women scholar crew, who have been doing this work and who have constantly been laboring to ensure that not just them, but also the communities that they are involved in are supported. The ways that I have seen oppression are vast, right? There are so many ways. In particular, there is this notion of wrapping up oppression wrapped up in and masked as excellence. For example, institutions who are striving for top 10, right? Top 5, number 1. And with this excellence piece comes additional ways to sift through, right, and marginalize already marginalized communities. And so that is how I'm seeing it, because this race to top 5, and in Florida, we have this thing called race to preeminence, is continuously pushing students to the margins. And the other way is thinking about how we, as BIPOC, right, activists, educators, scholars, are often being utilized as mascots when we really should be used as massive tools to move mountains. But we are often mascots, right, where we are representing something, but as long as we remain silent, we will be celebrated and appreciated. But once we actually keep it real with people, right, we no longer serve our purpose. So I also see it in that space, and it's not just my experience, but really uplifting those of my mentors and mentees who are constantly being shown, but not being heard. Thank you.
it was touched on a little bit, but what part of what I wanted to mention in noticing oppression is the way in which it permeates our every single day as professionals in what is professionalism, what is productivity, what are the expectations placed on people to not just be in a space, but then end up performing or having to, what is this notion of performance as a performative act, but also then as a measure of your worth as someone working in these spaces, right? And so a conversation I'm brought to is a recent one with a student where we talked about they were putting pieces together of that anti-racism and then the work being done in some other committees on campus around violence prevention, around these other things were intersecting, right? That these systems do not exist in silos. And, you know, we love the moments of seeing those pieces come together, but also recognize that that was a really overwhelming realization for that student, right? To realize that there are so many systems that are working in tandem against so many people. And so the way in which it manifests is vast, as has been mentioned, but I think the hope is in, and the viewing of anti-oppression is sometimes in these small victories that we do get, right? Knowing that systems have often failed us, our families, our friends, the people around us, but that those victories and those light bulb moments and those spaces where we have made progress really bring an immense amount of hope that we have to hold on to.
You know, again, just to uplift the things that have been said already, I guess something I'll add differently is really just thinking about the ways that institutions really try to separate the communities intentionally, right? And have all these ways that we are oppressed seen as singular and not connected, right? And I think because of that, we fight that very neoliberal game of, you know, we need to fight for resources. This is me and this is mine only. This is not yours, right? So I think in seeing how this, you know, is relevant to the work I do, I am privileged to have spent all my career in Asian American centers, and you know, earlier in my career, I would have been told that I would have been pigeonholing myself, right? But anyways, I think because of that experience of solely working at an Asian American center, it really is thinking about that ways that we are connected to each other, that even though all oppression is connected, anti-oppression is connected. You know, my liberation is connected to your liberation, right? So in thinking about that and flipping it, right, I think that's the way that we have to think about our work. Because, you know, at my institution, we have separate identity-based centers and race-based centers, and one would think that we fight each other for the resources. But instead, we flip it because we understand that it is through community that we get through this. And I think that's one way, and we've been really been able to do this, not only for the students, but for ourselves, because I think oftentimes it can feel very isolating to do some of this work and to understand and feel that we can lean on each other when needed, and to be able to see at those intersections of where maybe our challenge spots are, maybe where we are not serving students the best of our abilities. You know, that's how the work kind of shows up for me.
I just want to, again, uplift what everyone has said before. Truly, I agree with everything that has been said thus far, and particularly with, you know, with Aaron's recent point, you know, about separating us and fighting for resources. There's also an oppression, and I think the structures of oppression, they want us to play these oppression Olympics, you know, this kind of one-upman thing that they want us to follow and play because they want us to distract us. They want us to keep us from realizing, hey, these structures are really messed up, and they're the reasons why, you know, we are not thriving. And so, you know, we're not surviving, and we're also not thriving in any way. And that's how the structures are, the oppressive structures and the tools, one of them being capitalism, being the ways to keep us, you know, separated, to keep us from engaging in what real community looks like, you know. And oppression, you know, for me, it also shows up in the fact that, and this has been shared before, but I can't separate it. I can't separate it from, I engage with it every day. And it is something that I can't just show up to work and not be affected by what's going on in the world any which way I might want to, and I have to deal with sometimes, which feels like minute details or minute requests, when there's like a whole, you know, social unrest, duly so, happening, you know, around me. And I have to think about the fact that, you know, I am a transplant to where I've lived and where my institution. I am not from this state, and I have families in another state. And so I'm thinking about that and what's going on for them is really a part of what shows up for me in oppression. I think anti-oppression shows up for me in lately, what it has shown up for me is the fact that in spite of all the mire and the mud and structures that continue to take away or try to take away our joy, is that we still have joy, we still have resiliency, we still have vibrancy in how we show up every day. And that is a choice, and we will continue to do that. And I know many of us would not choose or take away or leave our identities regardless. Like, we would still keep who we are, even though we know the world is trying to end us and crush us. And that truly, and in spaces like these, and in NASPA and the friendships that I have made over trying to push forth anti-oppression, really has been what has sustained me and is keeping me going, even though there are days where I feel like I just don't want to deal with it. And it's tiring and it's exhausting and I want to cry, but that's really, you know, truly I'm thankful for this space. So yeah, I'll end on that.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you all for sharing from the heart and from your own lived experiences what this means beyond just the work, the labor in a theoretical way, but truly how it impacts you as individuals and for the students you serve and the staff that you work with. I'm interested just in terms of a next level to that conversation question, is that we often talk about oppression in terms of centered in power. And how would you describe the power dynamics in higher education while doing this DEI work specifically? Cece, would you like to start us off with that?
Sure, thank you so much. Well, that's a big question, so I'm gonna just skim the surface for now. I experience power and see it moving in many different areas, and in particular, being in Florida, we have, and being a state institution, that has also proven very challenging, right? Because we receive funding from the state, and the goals or the stated goals of the institution aren't always the exact same goals that the people have who give money to the school. And so money is power in many different places and spaces. And because of that, it is challenging to want to do something as simple as, let's do a land acknowledgement and help all departments right across campus, help all individuals who want a land acknowledgement to be able to create one and host one right in their space. However, the power dynamics that money is causing, right, is challenging, because now it's a matter of, well, if you want it, it's putting the ownership back on people like us, right? People who are always in the struggle, who are living it, and also trying to create spaces for people to breathe and thrive. So I do see the power dynamic in this funding piece. And oftentimes, right, as a junior faculty member who has written pieces already about talking about and pushing against racism, right, and issues of oppression within the academia, I also know that the powers that be may look up my research when they are deciding whether or not my packet is worthy enough, right? And for me, the thing that is my saving grace is that, again, going back to my women of color mentors, that I'm not questioning my worth regardless of what's happening to that tenure packet when it goes in. However, I do think it's very telling that that is something that I already have understood, right? The power of, if people don't agree, right, or don't approve of my truth, then it may turn out different for me. And the big thing also I'm seeing is, as a critical race theorist, in the previous presidency, right, critical race theory was banned. It was like, you don't talk about it in higher ed, you don't talk about it in any place, education specific. And then that went away, and I was thankful for that for a certain period of time, but also being in a state that has very problematic, harmful, and harmful leadership, it's again one of those things of, well, the thing that you have signed up to do, you are not allowed to do. So I do see people who have no understanding of how these can be utilized as tools of support and access, taking away things that they have no idea what they really are. And so that's challenging. I think the positive of the power dynamic, if there is a positive, is that when our students mobilize and move together, right, they will get all eyes watching them, right? They have the power to get all eyes watching them. And the challenge of that is not that our students don't know how to do that, because they are powerhouses. The challenge is that we have been fed these notions all our lives about, right, stay in your lane, you won't get in trouble, right? You're already a low percentage of the population on campus. Why would you want to add any more stress to you, right? Just fly under the radar, get this degree, and you can go somewhere else where it might be nicer for you. And that's what I think people are hoping for, right? That students will feed into that rhetoric. But I'm very thankful and motivated by our students, because when they come together, they are more powerful than I can ever imagine. And so I'm thankful for that. So I do want to acknowledge that there is this positive power that happens within our students, and also faculty of color on campus who are supporting those students. But the challenge again is those who have the majority of the power, those who are giving funding in various capacities, are the ones who are deciding who can say what and what can be said. And if you push against that, right, you may get burned or you may thrive, right? And so the decision for me is, which one do I want to take the risk on? And well, if I get burned, then I'm here. So I'll pause there. I've rambled enough.
Thank you, Cece. Chelsea, would you like to weigh in as well?
Yeah, I thank you so much, Cece, for what you shared. I really appreciate it. I feel like when we even think of like power dynamics, right, that is coming from such a place of like colonialism and settlement, where there's ownership over someone else. There is this looming understanding that I hold your life in my hands. But if you apply power, which has always existed through an Indigenous way of knowing, persons possess power, right? Not objects, not necessarily systems. And when I think of D&I work, it has to be intersectional by definition, right? Because in that understanding of power, we are, and power is the substantive embodiment of all of us. It is all of the relations, all of the experiences that we hold close and tangible, and all that we embody. And it's been said before that mobilization that we see within our students is not necessarily them accumulating that power, except it's the recognition of that internal power that has always happened. And for those of us who do student work, I learned so early on that power was never meant to be hierarchical. It was always supposed to be like reciprocity. It was always supposed to be relational, because our students do not come to us as empty vessels. We see them and we experience them, and that in and of itself is an exchange, right? So that motivation, that mobilization, like Karen said, this complete shift and unrest is the recognition that the power that has always been silenced and quieted is a purposeful act of oppression. And in regaining and reclaiming that power and utilizing and joining it with us, that's when we start to see that change. And again, going back, the intersectionality has always been there. None of us have just appeared, right? So we have taken it unto ourselves to say, I no longer need you to validate the work that I'm doing. And that's so hard because we live in tangibility with our institutions, but I very much have learned that it is not what our institutions can do for us, it's what we can do for our institutions. And the work and the power that we experience within that place, we will take with us as we leave it.
Thank you, Chelsea. Erica, would you like to weigh in?
This is a dynamic panel.
Go for it.
I will again, say that I definitely hold and I appreciate all the things that were said right before me, and I 100% agree. And I'll take it in this direction that I think of course we're sort of encouraged not to utilize the power that we possess and the power that we possess collectively by it's not sort of acted on by the system itself, but it is individuals within that system wanting to sustain that system because of the benefits that they reap from it. And I think that we're expected and we're silenced from being able to exercise our power. And students either learn to sort of tap into it in their collectivity, or they sort of retreat, and then they take that on into whatever other aspect of life they go into, and they're sort of diminished by the way that power shows up. I think power is not only money, as Cece said, but also it's in sort of these positional places, right? We've constructed higher education as this hierarchical system where senior leadership is at the top, faculty, and then depending on your campus, students are valued over, and then it comes down to faculty a staff of varying types and positions, right? And so we, as the folks that are typically on the bottom of the rung, we have to sort of push down our feelings and our experiences. And we see students that experience things, and we have to support them, but we're experiencing the same thing within our work environments. And higher education, as in student affairs, as progressive as we place ourselves, we feed into these particular power dynamics as well. And we perpetuate them, and people get into certain roles, and they do the things that they may have fought against when they were newer staff. But again, the system is not just perpetuating on its own. It requires actors and agents to keep it running. And the expectation to do DEI work but not have any power and authority, really serves to keep the system going as it is. And whenever I'm asked to do something, or encouraged to come in and speak to whomever, I'm still asked to do it a lot. I say no now. In my previous role, I was asked to do it a lot, and I said yes. And I found that, if I'm not in a sort of position to sort of be completely honest and to tell people what they need to be told, and to uncover and have the very hard conversations that need to happen, then it's all for naught. And if I'm going to give you a suggestion or a recommendation and you're not going to follow it, because in in turn, like you have the power to do or not do, then again, it's all for naught. It's purposeless for us to have a conversation and for people to continue to do what they do. And when it causes sometimes irreparable harm to our students, our faculty, and our staff of color. I say that if, we're really going to have this conversation, if you're really going to ask me to come in and make some recommendations, if you want me to speak to your staff, if you want me to work with staff about some DEI issue, then we need to come armed with the ability to really institute some real changes. And if real changes aren't going to happen, if things aren't going to be taken seriously, then you might as well not have me come and talk to anybody. And so I think that knowledge is also really useful. And I think knowledge is power, as people say. I try in my work to utilize my knowledge capital and power to really kind of dictate where I go and what I do. Whether that's actual quantitative data or if it's qualitative data, utilizing that to really direct how my department runs, or how much influence I can impose, to work with when others, working with a chancellor or a dean or anyone else. Like I really try to make sure that I do my homework and I know what I need to know in order to get certain things done. So we have that ability, we have that space, but we have to sort of be prepared and not go where we know our knowledge, our expertise is not going to be respected.
Well, let me just say this before we move on to our next question. I'm country. And so I say that because my reaction to when my soul gets fed, I almost slammed this computer down and walked away because I was like, I'm full. I am full. And I just got all of my, my spirit is at rest. I thank y'all so much so far for what you have contributed to this space. Our questions, I see as we go along, we have questions that are coming up. Some of the questions specifically taps into what you just talked about, Dr. Jones, around how do we build this community, and how do we make this transition from standing firm and saying, you're not finna play in my face. Like, this is not what we're about to do today. And also, how do we mobilize our kinfolk who sometimes don't act like our kinfolk in these spaces because of the way that white supremacist structures have completely dislocated and separated us strategically. And so I know that those are some things that we'll get to, but I just want to say, if you don't say nothing else today, y'all, on this panel, if I ask another question and y'all just, sit back and it's enough for me. So I say that, and I am going to continue with the next question. I can't thank you enough. So as a representative of an identity-based knowledge community within NASPA, how has your KC advanced healing and social justice from within? And I want to first ask Erica if you have any insight on this that you want to give.
Yeah, so at NASPA, NASPA in particular as a structure, a lot of the power that I find in the community is within some of these knowledge communities, right? So when I first attended NASPA as a grad student and found my way into a knowledge community meeting for the multiracial knowledge community, I uncovered a space that I didn't know existed anywhere in the world, right? And a space where people were sharing stories and experiences that I did not know other people had. Even though I had been involved in certain identity work and organizations, never had we explored multiracial. And it was at the time, I mean, we're still a fairly small KC and a fairly young-ish KC in the grand scheme of all of the knowledge communities that exist. But one of the things that I think our knowledge community has done well is really found the power in storytelling and in sharing our stories and in how much we have to give to each other, and that it does not matter what level in student affairs you are. It does not matter, you know, how long you've been around in the profession or whatever, that there is so much for us to give to each other. And through all of that, we have found, you know, through lines in struggles around identity and exploration. And that is how we ended up realizing that there was an entire set of people who were finding parallels in our multiracial knowledge community, and that was through talking about transracial adoptees, right? And realizing that these are you know, everyone's always like, multiracial is a growing population in both in our community or in our institutions as students, but also professionally, right? Same with transracial adoptee, right? And so one of the things that we spent a lot of really intentional time doing was figuring out how do we make space for those experiences that are not the same by any stretch, but have some similar through lines, and we are not making space as an organization for some of those conversations. And so how do we utilize what we have to make that space? And went through a really long process, and I know other cases have too, of the name change. The name change. It takes quite a bit to make it happen, right? I see all of the nodding of exploring that because that is, you know, navigating a system to do that, but also gathering input. And so one of what I have appreciated about being involved in our particular knowledge community is how much we try to not only find the community with each other, but then we listen and then bring that to NASPA and say, okay, here are the ways in which we would like to make suggestions around data collection for how you do, you know, I cannot remember exactly what it was, but it used to be, you know, when they're collecting data around race, I don't think there were options to like click multiple. You could click one or other or two or more. And so we were trying to understand a little bit more in populations. And so there are some system things, and there are some also interpersonal things that I think we have done really well to promote the community and to promote healing and acceptance and exploration, but also to navigate the system of NASPA itself, because it is, and exploring how we're a little rebellious sometimes. And, you know, when our stuff doesn't get updated after our name change, we're not going to use it. We'll do something else. Because that was the thing that we were advocating for. So can we please have it? So, you know, there are ways in which I think it has been really fun to observe and be part of this journey with our particular knowledge community, because it just has changed so much over the years and provided that space, I think, for so many people, and grown also. So sorry that was long-winded, but I appreciate our Casey very much for being that space that lets people explore some things that maybe they never knew was an option.
Thank you for that. I love it. That's not my name, so we're not gonna answer to that. We're gonna keep it moving. And that's the attitude that I hope everybody has all summer 2021 and beyond. Winnie, would you care to weigh in on this question as well?
Sure, no problem. I definitely echo Erica's statement about the name change. The gender and sexuality knowledge community used to be the LGBT, lesbian, gay, blah, 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 or GLBT knowledge community. And it took us a while to have that name change go through. And I think the way that our then co-chairs approached it, not only kind of like doing the survey here stuff, but also using NASPA's tools and things for theory and practice and all those kind of data points to help us push a little faster than before. And from then, I feel like there has been kind of like a chain reaction of other KCs following suit. So when the LKC was working on their name change, they utilized a couple of our leadership team members to help them with that process. And like when I saw the TAM KC doing the name change, the Womxn KC and all that kind of stuff. And so it really gives me hope that this additional healing and inclusivity of space across KCs is happening. For the gender and sexuality knowledge community, specifically, when we are in person at the annual conference, we always work hard to make sure that we create the spaces for the folks of our community, especially the ones that sit at intersections of identities. And so we have our Womxn, LGBT Womxn breakfast. We have our TQPOC breakfast and all those other spaces. When COVID happened and we went to the quick shift last year, instead of being in Austin, Texas, being virtual, we really pushed and fought to have all of our in-person community spaces virtual. And we did the same thing again this year. And I'm a person, I have low transparency and my levels of giving things and like I ain't got no filter sometimes. And so I let it be known in some of our community spaces that just like, we had to push to get those spaces that we always have. So we have our trans inclusion meeting, all those things. It's like, there's always a fight to get the spaces that we need. I think as identity-based KC, part of our work is to hold NASPA to task of the policies and procedures and the values that they say they propose. So recently we collaborated with a couple of other KCs and Public Policy Division to work on our statement regarding all the anti-trans legislation that's happening across the country. And NASPA has something on file, but it's just like, okay, what are you gonna do? Because it's not only affecting our students, but our staff, our faculty, et cetera. For me, during my tenure as co-chair, I've always been a person that's been, collaboration is very integral to me. My Strengths Quest, like collaborative, whatever is part of that. And so before I became co-chair, I was always the one visiting multiple KCs and trying to contribute and engage and support. But as co-chair, trying to really make more permanent those alliances, that kind of bridge building. And so the GSKC, we have a joint position with the LKC, and that's been really great and wonderful. This year we added a core member for Womxn Connections on our GSKC team. And so my goal is like eventually, hopefully that could become like a joint position with the Womxn KC, because we do a lot of informal collaborations, but I want to see more partnerships. We've worked with the AAKC on a number of things. And one of my points that really annoys me is the gendered stereotypes of the African-American men and women summits. And it's just like, if you're outside the binary, that is not really a welcoming space. And so for me, working with our amazing leadership team is, what are the spaces that we feel our constituents need? Also having like polls and all that stuff, but also reaching out to those folks around the virtual table, seeing what work that they're doing that we can help uplift and share and create those spaces. And one of the spaces that we've created is a recurring series called Blooming. They really focus on our Latinx, LGBT, trans, and inclusive folks. And that's been a really great welcoming, healing, and community space.
Thank you for that, Winnie. Chelsea, would you like to also weigh in?
Absolutely. So, you know, I like to think of my experience within the Indigenous people's knowledge community is that I was seeing in like a keyhole for such a long time within higher education, and my national co-chairs smashed the door open. And I found this awakening, right, of identity and how healing in and of itself indigeneity really can be. Within our KC, our chairs are notoriously matrilineal. So that in and of itself, you're just getting to see these phenomenal women of power because for their lives, like that is who they have always been. It has always been, you know, this idea of women hold the key to so much, right? But also within the KC, you know, and I think there's a bit of a misconception with the Indigenous people's knowledge community is that is rooted in Native peoples within the Americas, but we have colleagues that are global, from Kazakhstan to Kenya to Canada, forgive the all of the seas, but there is really something to be said about recognizing that where you are is who you are. And I think for me, when I came into higher education, I was still working off a space that I think so many Black and Brown folks feel, which is that our history feels so rooted in trauma. But my ancestors have had their feet planted in places far before they were forced to come here. And for those of them who lived and breathed in this space, the ones that whose names that I no longer can name or remember, they still hold power here. And that understanding gets applied to higher education because we are all future grandparents, right? Everything that we do is this incredible dissemination for those that are coming after us. And, you know, the IPKC really gave that to me. And, you know, when we come in community, we are, you know, to Erica's point, we are constantly talking story. We are constantly talking about the reclamation and the division from language. And one of my Diné colleagues talks about Ke, which is the understanding that it is we are not only jointed, but every action we take within one another is purposeful and rooted in love. That has been completely transformative. And, you know, to the point that, you know, Wanda had brought up before about skin folk not being kinfolk. Yeah, we've really felt that before. And I think the way in which you have to kind of perpetuate healing in that is the recognition of like how much grief do those people hold inside of them that they are no longer as open and welcoming to all parts of themselves. It is truly just rooted in that. It has nothing to do with us. That is them needing their own journey. That is them having been told for probably most of their life that their identity isn't quite enough. So they need to force themselves into these tiny boxes. And like I said, the IPKC said, there are no boxes here. There are literally no borders here. There are man-made borders only. So you open yourself back up to that, back up to the possibility, I would say. The KC left me and continuously leaves me feeling like there's so much possibility here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for that. Aaron P., would you like to share?
Yeah, I just, you know, resonate with a lot of the things that folks have already shared. And I think for me, it's always been kind of being in a state of dissonance with being, you know, a member of this organization. Because I think for me, like my professional home is NASPA, but when I really think about it, it's the APIKC, right? It's like this knowledge community has really helped grow me into the professional I am, and thinking about the spaces and places where I still feel like I have to be guarded and shielded, and, you know, being able to recognize that harm and trauma in some of those spaces. So I think previously it was, you know, the region I was part of before, and, you know, thinking about now, like, how can I leverage some of the personal relationships to really start telling my story, right? To be like, this is how I've been harmed by this organization. What can we do and use this collective community power to shift it? And I mentioned that just because even recognizing within our own knowledge communities that we also do cause harm as well, right? So I think in thinking about advancing healing and social justice, I can't answer that without also recognizing the ways that we might be causing harm. And I think about that as even with our name, like Asian Pacific Islander, you know, for a good part of it, it's this ethno hegemony, right, that exists within our own KC, that, you know, Asian Americans will use like API without really centering Pacific Islander voices, right? Are we centering those who should be centered when we're using a term like Asian Pacific Islander, or do we mean Asian American? And it's okay to have that distinction, right? I think there's a commitment to when we say that, you know, we are calling ourselves the API KC and not, you know, centering those needs. And I think I've been fortunate to be part of the knowledge community leadership team for a while and have just, you know, learned so much from the co-chairs and the other members of the leadership team of what does, recognizing centering the folks who need to be centered look like, right? So, and I think in this instance, how we could advance healing is really being intentional about doing our own work as a community, right? Because there are so many in our own knowledge community within the APIKC who don't see themselves in the knowledge community for a variety of reasons. So how can we, one, because the regions that we're supposed to, represent are so vast and large, right? Going back to, what Chelsea said, being forced to confine ourselves into these man-made borders, into forced identity is super difficult. But I think where healing comes from is from being able to allow people to be like, let's build this space that is safe enough for you to want to share your narrative, and for us to recognize it is a privilege for us to hear that narrative, right? That we are not entitled to your story. So I think that's where the path to healing can begin. And really, I think where a lot of this what I want to see within the other KCs, not necessarily the ones that are here, but what are the works of the more, I guess, functional area KCs doing, right, to uplift social justice in their KCs? Because I think, not to say it's expected from the folks that are represented in this call, but like when I think of something that happens, like I think of the KCs that are represented here to be some of the first to mobilize and respond, right? But what does that look like from the other KCs if we're supposed to be this field that's supposed to be centered on, education and really, moving not only students forward, but ourselves forward. So I think in thinking about healing and social justice, it can't just be focused on one part. It really needs to be thinking about how is it connected to the other parts, right? Because when a body's sick, you might tend to that one part, but then if it's radiating and reverberating, like you need to take care of the whole body. So how are we taking care of, I think of what our ESJ friends, big NASPA, right? How can we tell big NASPA to be like, all right, you need to take care of your whole body and then all the KCs will be fine, versus telling the specific KCs like you need to do your own work, because that only is going to be a band-aid at the end of the day. But I think I am consistently learning from our new professionals, honestly, and I hope we do them right and don't give them cause to leave. And if they do, that's fine, because this field does not care for everyone, right? So I am inspired and I learn a lot from our new professionals who have so much hope. And I think like some of my hope I left somewhere, right? So it's good to be reminded of why the work is so impactful in this field and the communities that we represent as well.
Thank you for that. Aaron J., Dr. Jones, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So similar to a lot of folks, that the KC was where sort of I got my first hand at being involved in NASPA. And the thing that they always say is that the KCs are the gateway to the profession, because they are sort of the way that a lot of folks kind of come in, and because we're community spaces, we're functional area spaces, and that draws a lot of people in. But I think in saying that, people are attracted to community. They come to NASPA seeking for community. And I also resonated a lot with what Winni said about how a part of our function not only is to be a community space, but we're also an advocacy space for our communities. And we have to hold big, like in EISJ, we talk a little bit about big NASPA. And when we think about the leadership of NASPA, that we have to sort of remind them that this is where the experience of NASPA is most closely felt. And you need to remember us when we're making decisions, when we're making statements, that there needs to be an inclusion of these communities, because people are so tied and connected to them, and that they may be in some ways the only place or space where they feel safe within NASPA. And so I think it's so important for us to lift up and to support the knowledge communities. And I've been in and out of AAKC since I started in NASPA almost, well, a little bit more than 10 years ago. And I think that I've seen it evolve a lot and I've seen it grow a lot. And some things that I've seen in my time where they fed into my own healing and, you know, really the accountability piece for Big NASPA is, you know, these critical conversations. We used to do these, so separate from the presentation space, separate from just the KC meeting, having critical conversations where we can kind of delve in deeply into particular topics. And, you know, that also was a space that had to be kind of fought for. And I think on a regular basis, you know, now in this virtual space, it already was kind of a thing in between the conferences to have virtual space, but now it's sort of a more regular occurrence. Folks have tapped into, you know, staff across the country to have Friday check-ins or, you know, conferences or not conferences, but workshops and panels that include sort of a need for intergenerational conversations. How do you get to the dean or the vice president, vice chancellor level? And those are so critical because the pipeline, some people say, is leaky. That it is very difficult for us to ascend to these higher levels without sort of the wisdom and the mentorship of folks that are there now. And I see that very much, you know, in our spaces. It sometimes can be challenging because of those intergenerational differences, but I think it's still vital, and that's how we grow and we move on is having, you know, space to actually have those conversations. When I was a regional rep, I think a lot of the things that I did was to, again, just hold space. And the space doesn't always have to be sort of, you know, we're going to have a hard conversation today. Sometimes you just need spaces where, like we did when folks joined the call, just listen to music, enjoy ourselves, and, you know, be in community and in like breathing the same air a little bit. I really, the thing I miss most about the conference, the regional conference and our annual conference, is the opportunity to connect with the locality, right? So an intentional thing that, you know, we've done during the annual conference, and I've done at a small level for the regional conference, is how do we hold space and really connect to the place we're in? And that's supporting a local business that also has great food. And who where we can play music, where we can kind of build and network and socialize. And I really see that as an important function of the work that AAKC does. And you know, then the last thing I'll say is that you know, without a space like this, you know, some folks might not connect as well. I've been a part of other KCs as well. And you know, moments where, you know, I'm the only or one of very few Black people in that space, and it may be a functional area that I work in on my daily, and you know, I don't need that. I need spaces where, you know, I'm affirmed, I'm loved, I'm appreciated, and that I feel like I'm not sort of the sore thumb that's sticking out, right? And I think that has been that way for me, and you know, I can see how it's that way for a lot of other staff that join NASPA.
Thank you. And Karen, I'm going to ask you to also weigh in, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So in thinking about, this is twofold, like, for this question. Like, for me, I was tapped, you know, by another woman of color to apply for the position, for the social justice position co-chair, and it was someone that I happened to have known since my, you know, beginning days of NASPA, and we've kept up that friendship almost 10 years at this point. So, and that's an amazing thing. And, you know, kind of what Dr. Cece had said about women of color, that mentorship, that network is important, and that is healing of like, hey, not only do I see you, I value you, you have something to offer for this role or this position. And I think that that is an important distinction, you know, to give and to and to share with people. And I valued that position so much that that person tapped me, and you know, I encourage all of us to do that together, because that is healing. Because I think, particularly of us in our identity spaces and the salient identity that we have, we are, you know, we feel like we are not good enough. You know, that talk in the back of our head, it does enter our mind. And so sometimes we do need someone else that we may identify or coexist with to say, no, hey, this is what I see in you, and I hope, and that hopefully helps you to see that in yourself. So that was particularly healing for me. I think in the ways that we have tried to advance that, you know, Winni mentioned, you know, women with an X, you know, we have gone through our name change, and that was 2 years of work that was put in, that I have enjoyed and toiled with, and obviously we've gone back and forth about, because obviously there's some pros for the change to the X, and then there's some negatives for people about the X, and we're trying to weigh, and hopefully a space that has been historically and initially originally thought is very gendered or very cisgendered. We're hopefully opening that space for, regardless of how we identify, and hopefully it's a welcoming space, that it is kind, that it is affirming, however you choose to come by, and whatever terms and words that you use to define yourself, it's still welcome, and we hope that it's not limiting. And obviously, I think, and it was important in the feedback when we surveyed our constituency of like, we hope that this is not a surface change. There has to be some action behind that. And as one of the people who helped, you know, co-author the proposal for the name change, and then has now continued on to that, I see that very much as my role, to be proactive and continuing to make that name change not be in vain. Like it has to be action forward. It has to not just be, oh, we checked off the box, we did it, great. No, that's not going to work for me. That's not how I'm not going to want to leave the space, you know, eventually, and it's not going to work for me and for the people that I do know and for the people that I don't know. That's very much it. And then last but certainly not least, my fellow co-chairs in our last term, they organized affinity spaces, you know, for when the protests happened over the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and honestly, the countless others that have happened. And they asked me if I wanted to be a part of the planning, and honestly, I wasn't in the space to do that. I could not do that. And I will be forever grateful in a healing moment for them taking on that and then just running with it, and just really making sure that, one, I was cared for, but also the other people who might be feeling away had that space, and could do that and wanted to do something. And so truly, I have so much love for that, particularly those co-chairs, because they have been affirming for me, but also affirming for anyone in their roles, and supporting them and providing that space. And so if you know someone like that, and let them know that I also give them their flowers now, while they can hear it and see them and smell them. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We are somehow coming up at the top of the hour. I'm just so grateful for all of you folks. You know, so we had some questions in the chat. rather than have us answer this live, I'm going to invite panelists who are willing and able to do so, that maybe in our follow-up, when I do email everybody for an assessment and with the recording, that folks can maybe answer a little bit of this. So I was going to combine for last question, but we don't have time for it live, but just wanted to read it to our audience and to our panelists just to kind of ponder a little bit. So we had a question prepared a little bit about anti-oppression and that being top of mind for folks in higher education, but also somebody in the chat similarly talked about anti-racism frameworks and how much is it centering folks of color, or is it really serving white people at our predominantly white institutions? Another person asked a question about empowering BIPOC communities at a PWI, and often as you do that, you also encounter BIPOC folks who are maybe not, as folks have shared earlier, maybe not kinfolk, even though if they're skinfolk. So kind of relating, how does one engage in this work at a PWI or really any institution without belaboring further the very folks who are marginalized and oppressed by this work? And so thinking about that, of course, we can't do this in the moment. I wish we could, wish we so much, but in gratitude for everybody in this space, want to at least read that aloud to honor those that did ask the question, and for all the panelists. In some ways, you answered pieces of these questions in your own answers to other pieces. So again, gratitude for each of you for serving in this opportunity, and just being in community with one another. We had, again, 100+ folks that joined us, and many more who I'm sure will see the recording thereafter. Just thankful for each of you as individuals and as this group, as we've planned for this, as we've talked about this beforehand, but even in this space, living the lives that we do and allowing us to be in community and support and validate and affirm all the different experiences that you're having in big NASPA, in the KCs, and well beyond. So just note for the audience, this was not meant as a NASPA-oriented event. We had NASPA representation, but it was not meant as a big NASPA event. We didn't ask for permission. That wasn't our shtick. We're talking about anti-oppression regardless of whether people give us permission to do so. So again, Wanda, I want to make sure that I leave some time for you if you want to give us some closing remarks before we close.
Thank you. I'm full, right? And I know that this is a conversation that can continue on and on and on. This has been such a really good space for me. Continue to do the work of unraveling the ways in which within my work, right, of thinking of how to better create more trusting spaces, safer spaces, if possible, as well. And to really, I think one of the things that we all know, but I think we're so conditioned, is that we're not just, we can't save students and forget about ourselves. We cannot. There is no way for us to be able to sit in spaces and think about how we're changing, how we're shaping students, but sitting in the same system that is killing us. We cannot. That's just not possible, because this is not a space where it is do as I say and not as I do. Students see when the system is harming us. And we are, to the best of our abilities, our work is to constantly work to mentor and show the best ways in which we can try to live this life and live a life of quality across our lifespan. Students see that. They see that. And so doing this work, this radical work of trying to separate these spaces from a white supremacy and working to dismantle it instead of reform, because that's not even an option, right? I want us to remember us in this space as well. I want to also just greatly, sincerely thank the panel, our panel of experts, our panel of amazing, amazing storytellers, these gift givers of knowledge today. I also want to thank Brian. Brian has worked so amazingly hard to bring this together, and is what I say. Lastly, I just want to touch on the fact that, Brian, you did create, you did add the resources. So on the slides that were running before we officially started, there are some resource slides too for folks who are wanting to continue doing the work of digging into what this looks like as it relates to recreating, transforming, adding to the arsenal that you already have. And so those will be available when we also send out surveys, but they're also available here. And once you get the recording, it will be there as well. So thank you, Brian. Thank you all. Thank you all so much. And I pray that you have a day as full of rest as possible in the world in which we are living. We don't know what's happening next, but I ask that you take some time today to continue to center yourself, to center your own revolution, and to practice liberation on an individual level. I am all about tiny acts of liberation and practicing it in the moment and not waiting for this future world that we're trying to build. Because, child, if we don't practice it now, we ain't gonna be there. Because folks who look like us, we ain't gonna see it if we don't practice it. So practice it, y'all, and just know that as a KC, we appreciate this time that you have given us today. Thank you.